Doug. Yes, we had to flip-flop a little bit today, but Doug and I were able to jump in, and so any errors that we make, we'll blame on Aaron since he can't be here. Doug and I are trying to come up with a good story for why Aaron had a hog on the front of this, and we can't come up with one. So we're not exactly sure why. And then Aaron, just to add his other affiliations, he's with Ohio State Extension and the Bird Polar Center. Let's go to the next slide.
Stand by. Trying to do that. How about
this?
Yes,
Doug's running the slides today, so we're going to have to tag team this.
There we go.
Yep, just a reminder of the parties who are involved here. Always a good collaboration of folks from state and federal university agencies and involved in this. Next month, our presenter will be Laura Edwards, the South Dakota State climatologist at SDSU Extension. And you can see the links to the previous webinars and other information. So again, do add questions along the way. We'll deal with them at the end. Let's go ahead to the next one. Okay, recent conditions. We're going to check on temperature and precipitation rankings like we always do, check on hydrology and drought, look at ag-related issues, and then we'll hand it over to Doug to talk about some other impacts and the outlooks. El Niño, La Niña, and where we are right now, just a sneak peek. El Niño is gone now officially, and we're starting into looking at where we're looking at on La Niña. Picture on the left-hand side is courtesy of Chris Vagaski, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, from the Wisconsin State Climate Office running their WISCO net, their new network developing. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So wheat is, kind of where we are right now, looking at one of the things we've been talking about with the early phenology, wheat being ahead of schedule, working on getting close to harvesting in southern Ohio already. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, looking at our usual recap of conditions for May, then the last 3 months, then we'll also look at the last year because it's kind of interesting some of the numbers we're looking at from an overall standpoint. Very warm in the eastern part of our region, top 10 warmest Mays for Ohio and Indiana. And then a number of other states that are, well warmer than average, didn't quite make the top 10 overall. Above average, that whole area, Kansas, Missouri to the Great Lakes is all above average. And then near average to actually cooler than average in Wyoming. So, pretty close, pretty clear transition, warm east to near average to cooler to the west. Let's go ahead. And then splitting up the maximum temperature rankings on the left-hand side, and the minimums on the right-hand side, can see, similar pattern, but a bit of difference overall. The minimums coming in higher than the maximums are if we do a ranking on the minimum scale. Top 10 warmest Mays for minimum temperatures all across the ice, or not quite all the ice states, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and then warmer than average again for that Kansas up to the Great Lakes, Colorado and Wyoming on the cool side. If we look at the maximum temperature side, everybody was near average to above average, and the above averages weren't quite as significant as the minimums were. Let's go ahead. Now we'll jump back to our 3-month periods, March to May. You see again a very similar pattern, except it's expanded now throughout most of the region so that nearly all the states are above average. Second warmest spring on record, March through May for Ohio, Kentucky. Third warmest for Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri, and then the only place that was near average was up in North Dakota and Montana, again, where the little bit cooler conditions are. But again, overall, very, very warm overall. Let's go ahead. To put another spin on this here, we're going to go back now to the last year. June of 2023 to May to 2024, and the rankings that show up very impressively on the right-hand side, that June 2023 to May 2024, all of our region, well, in fact, all of our region coming in as top 10. Wisconsin being during our weekly meeting this week, noted that they were the warmest June to May on record out of 129 years of data that we have. And then on the left-hand side, we have a station rankings, where different station rankings were showing up. On the left-hand side, we were out in the plains, and as you would expect, the Northern Plains area not coming in anything too substantial, but as you get further south in Colorado, Nebraska, and then along the I-29 corridor, top 10-ish numbers, and these numbers are a little bit harder to read, unfortunately. But then most of the stations in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, or the eastern part of our Midwestern region around Great Lakes, coming in top 10 over the last year, and then some stations up around the Great Lakes were the warmest year on record, which kind of fits in with what we've seen so far. Let's go ahead. And then go back to May from a precipitation recap. We've flipped around our drought situation, which we're going to talk about a bit more. The 3 states in the North Central, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, all coming in at top 10. Also Kentucky jumping in at the top 10. And then several states around that are on the wetter than average side, but again, as precipitation can be, it's a little spottier. Montana and North Dakota coming in on the wetter side, while Wyoming and South Dakota not showing up as quite as wet as the stations around them. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, and we'll look at the 3-month period now. And those three stations, or 3 states up in the North Central, again show up as the top, in the top 10 also. Top 4 wettest springs for Wisconsin and Iowa, and top 10 for Minnesota. Most of the other states coming in on the wetter than average side for the spring. The outliers here are our western states, Colorado, Wyoming, and Kansas, which we'll show as we go along here is still having some drought issues. And that's why we've been able to make big inroads, as we've been talking about, into our overall drought situation. Let's go ahead. And to break this down a little bit more as to these graphics, again, nearly all the graphics that you see here, you can go look for yourself. This is from the National Center for Environmental Information, part of NOAA. They break this down not only by state. You can go to climate division, or in this case, go by county. So those darkest areas, you can see the ones are the wettest. A few counties in north central-ish to northwest Iowa, and then south central Minnesota that were the wettest March to May on record. And then a lot of stations, or a lot of counties around them, leaning towards the wet side, which was the case for the central part of our region and most of the eastern part of the region. The only places that show up on the dry side were a few stations in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, and those Montana stations may have been west of the divide, where we don't focus too much of our attention. And then some of the stations from eastern Colorado into Kansas, we mentioned, still hanging on with some of the drought issues going on. Let's go ahead. Now, looking at a little bit more of a time frame that that put us through the end of May. We're almost 3 weeks into June now, so covering our last 30 days or our last month overall, looking at departure from normal temperatures. Generally, warmer than average is continuing throughout our region for nearly the whole area, on the order of up to 2 to 3 degrees above average at the peak. The area from Montana, North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, and a little bit of Kentucky running slightly below average. Nothing too severe overall for the cooler, but so generally warmer than average overall. Let's go ahead. From a precipitation standpoint, on the left-hand side, percent of normal precipitation over the last month or so. This is, this is through yesterday, and then also percent of normal on the right-hand side over the last week. indicating some of the areas that have received some of the very heavy rainfalls going on. Parts of the areas from the plains, parts of Nebraska, part of Kansas, on up into southeastern South Dakota, northwest Iowa, near the Twin Cities, and then up around the Duluth area, particularly over the last 7 days, have received much more than average precipitation, and that carries over to the last month. In contrast, you look at the areas out to the west, say western South Dakota out to parts of Colorado and Wyoming, and then southeastern Iowa to the east, have been running below average during the last 7 days and last month. So after we cut into the drought areas in the eastern Corn Belt, we've seen some retrenchment, and we'll show that here in just a little bit. And then we have gone from dry to excessively wet in some of the areas of the northern areas, where we're leading to some waterlogged fields, some potential replants, and some other issues with just excessive wetness. Let's go ahead. So talking about that excessive wetness and soil moisture situation, two figures on the left-hand side are the percentile rankings from another NOAA product called the leaky bucket model. Basically, the greener area on the upper left-hand side is wetter, and the greenest areas, that from the eastern Dakotas to Minnesota, come in at the 99th percentile, near wettest on record from a ranking scale. But then, Eastern Corn Belt, mentioned we've seen some drying. And then if you look on the bottom, that is the change. What's the change we have seen over time? All the Eastern Corn Belt and even into Iowa, we have seen some drying out, and then drying out to the west with the warmer summertime conditions and lack of precipitation. While in contrast, North Dakota and parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin have become increasingly wet over this time period. On the right-hand side, we have the USDA NASS, National Agricultural Statistics Service, showing how people are ranking the topsoil moisture, and topsoil moisture is considered the top 6 inches and these are not actual measurements, but these are estimates from the situation. Generally, Minnesota and Wisconsin have, nothing is considered short to very short. Around that, the Dakotas to around to Iowa and Missouri, we're in the teens. We have some increasingly dryness pointed out. In Ohio, 47% of the surface soils are considered short to very short. That's gone up by 42%. That's what the bottom number is indicating. So there's been some quick increases with the warmer temperatures we've seen and the lack of precipitation overall. Let's go ahead. And Doug just messaged to remind me that this is, we are approaching the peak precipitation time of the year, and actually have passed it in some of the areas. Climatologically, we start to fall off in the way of precipitation on average, while average temperatures start to increase. So that increases the demand part of that, and that's actually what we're talking about here. Balancing what's going on at the land surface by what is being added to it in the way of precipitation, and then balanced by what is being removed from that surface by evaporation or by the crop, whatever's growing, taking up some moisture. And the graphic on the left-hand side is on the Drought Monitor category scale. So we have pretty widespread across the whole region increased demand, or drier air, and then hotter temperatures, increasing demand from the surface. So while we've been getting additional precipitation in some cases, we're needing to use more of that precipitation because of the atmospheric demand. And where you've not had precipitation, that's what's accelerating the drying out of those areas. And on the right-hand side, this product is called EDDI. The evaporative demand, I can't remember what my acronym on this is. Evaporative demand something index. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, we've seen some worsening of that throughout most of our region, except for far southern areas, Missouri over to Kentucky. Let's go ahead. And this has been fairly persistent over the, the spring and into the early summer part. So even though it's not as terribly acute right now, it is been a persistent issue that we've had from actually going on since late winter with the warm temperatures that we've had. So looking at where we are in the way of stream flows, you kind of goes along with what we'd expect. That area from Iowa to the north, showing higher than average stream flows. We've really overcome the dryness in that area. Lots of green throughout most of the region, indicating near normal stream flows. Now, that doesn't mean, when you're near normal, it can be a little above or a little below. We have some dry areas showing through in the eastern Corn Belt, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, a little bit in northern Missouri, and then some out in the plains, and then the dry area from eastern Colorado to western Kansas, where we haven't had as much precipitation to recover as part of this. Let's go ahead. Okay, getting a little bit more into detail on the water side here. The graphic in the upper left-hand side is kind of a little bit of a cryptic one, but this is a new product, a new graphic from a new NOAA product showing stream flow conditions and where flood situations are across the whole area. Anything that's in green is considered near normal. Anything that's in yellow is we have higher stream flows. Anything that's in orange, and then the graphic, the scale isn't just to the right of it there. Moderate flood. I don't think we have anything in major flood. Maybe a few around the cities, around the Twin Cities, but at least some moderate flooding conditions on some of the major rivers and some of the minor rivers. So yeah, while bringing those up, we're kind of looking and discussing what's going on overall from a river system standpoint, because we have come through a few year period now. We've had some persistent problems on the mid to lower Mississippi, where we've had a lack of water and led to navigation issues. That has largely gone away for right now, but we are watching what's going on ahead. Basically the heavier rainfalls in the northern area are contributing a lot to the Mississippi River right now, so there is a good contribution from the Mississippi. In contrast, the Ohio on the bottom is drying out on so the flows from the Ohio are starting to drop off, and that is a bit more of important because actually as we go through the year, the Ohio River actually contributes to 60 to 65% of what of the flow that goes south of the confluence there. So the Ohio River is quite important. So basically we're getting enough from the Mississippi right now that there's not a problem, but we will have to continue to monitor this as we go along if things become widespread dryness is more of an issue. And this will not be happening immediately, but we're talking with the water folks the last few days. They're pointing out this as being a potential issue as we get into the latter part of summer, early part of fall. From a Missouri River standpoint, we're on a lock and, we have a reservoir system there. So, basically we've all the snow has melted out. We've reached the peak of the snow, the melt out on the snow, and overall we're seeing less flow into the river system because of the lack of snow and some dryish conditions going on. But there still is sufficient water to continue navigation and be able to maintain flows on the Missouri for the time period. Let's go ahead. Looking at the Great Lakes, on the left-hand side, temperatures, southern lakes are obviously warming up, along with the warmer temperatures that we see this time of year, warming up very quickly. Because of the extreme rainfalls that we've had and some dry conditions over the last few years, we are seeing some water quality issues. Harmful algal bloom projections are higher than average. That's what's showing on the upper graphic there for Lake Erie, because of the additional rainfalls early on. And then we're also predicting an above average summer dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. We have a lot of nitrogen over the last few years that has not been used in fields because of drought. And the situation now is that, with the heavier rainfalls, we've flushed a lot of that nitrogen into the water systems. Let's go ahead. Okay, and then our Great Lakes, just looking at quickly at what is happening with the Great Lakes, they have been rising because of the increased rainfalls in the upper parts of the basin. So, that's pretty typical for the spring. They are all the lakes are at or below levels from 2023. And then they're at or above the June average level for Lakes Michigan, Huron, and Erie. Let's go ahead. Okay, summarize kind of where we are on a drought standpoint. I've been mentioning this as we've gone along. This is the drought monitor map that was just released this morning. You see lots of yellow across the eastern part of our region. We've talked about the lack of drought. We had eliminated drought in the Midwest part of our region. We have seen some resurgence with more coverage of the yellow, the D0 area, and actual drought being reinstated in a small area of northeastern Missouri, and then a very small spot in east central Illinois. So not serious situations yet, but seeing some signs of those starting to recur. If you look out in the plains, we've mentioned Kansas and eastern Colorado with ongoing drought issues. There's some recent rainfalls will probably eat into some of that drought area as we go into next week's map, and then also up into Montana, Wyoming, and the eastern Dakotas with some increasing dry areas there. But overall, still no major, not too serious a drought issues. The only real major drought issues we have going on are down in the New Mexico, Texas area, where there actually was some very interesting dust storm activity over the last couple of days. Let's go ahead. Zoom in a little bit to show you some of the areas from the central north National Weather Service central region. You can see a little bit better where defined where those areas are. And on the right-hand side, probably to point to some of the changes we've seen. So on the upper right-hand side, we have the amount of the number of class changes in the drought monitor over the last 4 weeks. So some worsening in from parts of Iowa, Illinois, and to the east, while there's been some improvement in northern Iowa up to Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin, down into Kansas, and some worsening to the west. If you go back 13 weeks, this is a 3-month period, you see the major shifts we've seen on the U.S. drought monitor. Major improvements all through the central third of the area. Again, that little bit of worsening in the eastern Corn Belt, and then worsening out to the west overall. Let's go ahead. And let's go ahead here, touch on some ag issues. We've had some folks, Trent Ford, talking about the differences. We had people that were able to get planted early, and crops generally look pretty good planted early. Ones that were delayed are seeing some issues, some weed issues, or a lack of being able to get root development. So where we are in the way of corn, percent emerged in the upper left-hand side, and the percent good to excellent on the right-hand side. Generally, we are just ahead of the 5-year average, 93% emerged on the corn side. Those north central states where we've been a bit wetter have slowed things down. Otherwise, Dakotas to Kansas and then to the eastern Corn Belt are all ahead of the 5-year average, with Ohio the largest at 11% ahead of average on the 5-year average. Generally, crop conditions as they are this time of year are good. Wisconsin and Illinois, the ones that are a bit lower than the other ones, probably a little bit of dryness in Illinois, a little bit of wetness up in Wisconsin, causing problems there. Next slide. Looking at soybean, and you're going to see a very similar pattern in soybean, though a little bit different from area to area. We're actually 2% ahead of the 5-year average in the way of soybeans planted. So we're in pretty good shape that way. Again, Ohio is the leader there, and much of the eastern Corn Belt a bit better. And soybean conditions also pretty good generally. Next slide. And winter wheat, I mentioned earlier, with the warm late winter and early spring, winter wheat has been well ahead of average in the way of phenology and moving along to harvest very quickly, and generally in good to excellent conditions. Whereas looking out to the west, Colorado and Kansas, the dry areas, things, winter wheat is the conditions have been worsening in that area. But Aaron captured one comment here about You know, with the rainfalls, it might have helped out from the where we were in the March and April standpoint, but had hail and wind events that hit many of the wheat fields, and that's been the downside. A lot of the severe weather events we've seen so far this year. Let's go ahead. And then just a few other crop conditions. Pasture and range conditions generally pretty good. You know, some weakness out in the plains, but not too bad. And spring wheat, generally good to excellent. Let's go ahead. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Doug now to talk about events and hit the outlooks.
Let's see. Can you hear me, Dennis?
Yes, I can. Go for it.
All right. You can start looking at the questions, and you can answer the orange tree and southern cotton questions that are sort of out of our region of concern. But maybe you do know something, being a USDA dude. So yeah, this is recent snow that happened apparently up in Glacier National Park. So don't go there for the next couple of weeks, or unless you really like snow and want to get stuck. But it's been cold, as Dennis was showing, a little bit in the west, or a lot in the west. Before we get into all the other stuff, I just read an article, and so I had to put this in here. Obviously, it's Happy Solstice Day to those of you who love solstice and lots of sunlight. This is the earliest, earliest in the year that we've celebrated solstice. 3:50, by the way, today. So we'll be done with this. You can go outside and look in this. Well, don't look at the sun, but enjoy the sun. The earliest since George Washington's presidency. Every leap year from here until 2100 will continue this trend of earlier and earlier. Don't ask me why. It has vagaries to do with our tilt and lots of other astronomical things. The sun is now, well, will be directly over the Tropic of Cancer at 3:50 p.m. Central Time. I also want to differentiate, just so you guys understand, when we talk about summer in the climatological and weather world, we talk about June, all the way through June, through August, and we pretty much cut it off. September is a fall month. So anyway, there is your moment of, I guess we'll call it moment of Zen, and move on. Severe weather was quite prolific across the nation. You can see all the reports, all those little dots represent different types of severe weather reports, including tornado is red, severe wind is blue, and severe hail is green. So very active in May. And as Aaron noted, 6,200 storm reports. That's a lot. And compared to last year, especially, kind of a dead year, quote unquote, or relatively speaking, it's a better way to say it, from last year. We had several rounds, yep, and several significant events, some of which were May 21st across Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, in Wisconsin, and then the Memorial Day weekend, severe weather, Kentucky to the East Coast. Whoops, I got to hit. Oh, it does work if I do that. All right. Some of the most notable severe events were in Greenfield, Iowa. Big tornadoes, some deaths, unfortunately. A very interesting and probably painful if you're out in it. Hail event in Northeast Colorado. That is not snow. That is all hail. And then down below, we have the Dawson Springs, Kentucky event, we'll call it, with 53 tornadoes reported across the whole region, and a few deaths, some deaths in Kentucky. From a heat point of view, yes, as Dennis said, we've been generally warm. Not outstanding warm, but generally warm, especially when you add it up over a long period of time, like a year or 3 months or whatever. You start getting records when you start extending it that long. But on a shorter like a daily time period. We just started breaking more records, I guess you could say, from a hot point of view recently, and you can see across the Midwest some of those black dots, or you can see the dot plot on the left showing the black squares with both high and low, if you will, new temperature records. And then the other colors show high, only high, and only high minimums temperature records there. So a lot of minimum temperature records, which means our low temperatures are not as low, are setting new records for being high. It's hard to say that. Limited heat, and we also have this Weather Service and NOAA have a heat risk map that you can go look at. It's sort of new this summer. It shows what areas are at greatest risk, if you will, for various types of heat and length and all that stuff. So there's the link to that if you're interested. Just some little bits and pieces from other states around the area. Second lowest heating degree. So this past winter, again, harping on the same thing. I'm not going to go through all these, by the way. Harping on the same thing that Dennis brought up about how warm it was last winter, except for about a 10-day period. We had a low heating demand, so we didn't use as much energy to heat our homes as we normally do. There's some other Chicago nights being above 70, Iowa, wettest May, or 8th wettest May, etc. Kansas overall, drought improvement across mostly the east, 9 inches in Manhattan, 110 degrees already in part of Kansas. And Hayes is not Hayes. Sorry, that's a misspelling. I should have caught that. Hayes, Kansas, for those of you there. Sorry about that. North Dakota has been pretty good. South Dakota, a little bit dry in the west, getting some wildfire activity. And Wisconsin, very active in terms of severe weather and wetness. One sort of disaster that happened very recently in Montana was this breaking of a major irrigation pipe. It supplies 121,000 acres in north central Montana, tribal as well as non-tribal lands impacted by that. Just wanted to let you know. And he mentions, illustrates the societal complexities of drought. Is it drought when they don't get their water? If it's a pipeline or not, it's always a fun thing to talk about. And then let's move on to the outlooks. So here's the El Nino La Nina or neutral outlook. I don't want to get all technical with you about this, so I'll try not to. We're currently in what we call a neutral condition. We just dropped out of El Nino, and that basically means our temperatures in the equatorial Pacific have cooled off from what they were. El Nino is above normal temperatures in the equatorial Pacific for the most part, and La Nina is cooler. Blue on that giant map of the globe, that blue right along the equator there from Peru west, indicates cooler than normal temperatures. And that's where we are and are headed for the next few months, several months actually. And the bar graph on the right, all those little letters underneath are indicating seasons. So May, June, July is the one furthest to the left, shows a very strong or very high probability of neutral. Well, guess what? We're in neutral, and that probability, that prediction is correct. June, July, August shows that gray bar being neutral, coming down, and the blue bar being cooler than normal, La Nina, going up. And you can see that blue line sort of dominates the rest of the period here in terms of what's going on. So the probability of La Nina is going to increase as we go further and further into this year and into early next year. After that, I have no clue. But that means some different things for different parts of our viewing area, if you will. Just in the near term, there's an increased risk of the left map here, the one furthest to the left, shows a temperature probability or increased risk of warm extremes where it's yellow, orange, and red. So if you live in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, maybe Illinois, and this is for August, September, October, by the way, August, September, October. The risk for pretty warm temperatures is higher, and really the rest of the area, nothing to talk about. In terms of precipitation, on the right map, really not a lot to base anything on. Those light yellows and light greens are, I won't say meaningless, but don't have a lot of continuity to them. The only place really is the Four Corners and really Arizona that has a strong connection to be dry as we get into the late summer and early fall. Okay, looking at the next 7 days of accumulated precipitation, you can see several things on this graphic. Aaron mentions high pressure anchored over Tennessee Valley over the weekend will strongly influence the weather pattern. So you kind of see, if you kind of imagine things a little bit in your mind, you kind of see a pinwheel around Tennessee, around the lower Mississippi. Okay, you see heavy precipitation from western Nebraska, sort of north and east, all the way to the Great Lakes and up in Canada. And then you see some more precipitation well to the south of southern Texas. Some of that's part of this this tropical system coming in, and up through New Mexico and Colorado. So if you kind of imagine a giant pinwheel there rotating in clockwise fashion, you might sort of imagine this precipitation revolving around what we call a high pressure system. Anyway, dry in the middle, wet on the outside. Very active pattern, as you mentioned, expect less for southern eastern states. All right, on we move. Week 2, now this is June 27th through July 3rd, the day before, obviously the day before July 4th. We see a pattern on the left that shows us a very high probability of above normal temperatures for pretty much, well, the whole East Coast, but also the much of the Midwest and North Central region, except for the Dakotas, maybe northern Minnesota into Montana and portions of Wyoming, where it could be near normal to a slight near normal. Let's leave it at that. So a lot of heat for a lot of us. Week 2. The 8 to 14 day week 2 precipitation outlook shows for this very slight leaning towards above normal precipitation all the way from the Gulf Coast to Canada, with a little center up there where it's already super wet in Minnesota and northern Wisconsin and portions of the Dakotas. Looking at hazards or sort of potential extremes, if you will, for that same time period, week 2, we're showing excessive heat from coast to coast, but only a slight chance of really excessive heat, as opposed to the moderate chance along the east, let's say mid-Atlantic down into the Carolinas, mostly in the coastal range, being really hot out there during this period, much above normal. And you can see that on the right map too. You also see these like light brown to yellow areas, I don't know what you call them, for especially in Ohio, Indiana, northern Kentucky. Those indicate potentially rapid onset drought risk. So what you could also call it a flash drought. Because of the heat, because of lack of moisture, drought could build in there very quickly this week. Over here, or over in July, for the whole month of July, here's the outlook for the whole month. So again, not really a big difference from what we just showed you in terms of temperature. Still warm, couple centers of warmth, if you will. East Coast, and sorry Ohio, sorry Kentucky, you're in that strong category. And same out in Colorado and western Nebraska and Wyoming. And then lower probabilities doesn't mean it's going to be cool. It just means that it may not be as excessive as some of these other areas, and the probability of above normal is still substantial for the center, for almost the entire nation, unless you're on the West Coast. Okay, and then the precipitation outlook, which is always, the probability is always a little lower because precip is really tough, especially in July, to predict at least a month out like this, shows that big center of below normal probabilities over our western, northwestern areas of the central region. And then as you move sort of east, another center with a little lower probabilities, but still something to watch, especially when it comes to river levels and agriculture, is this below area in the Ohio Valley. Moving on, here's the whole rest of summer into early fall outlook in terms of temperature on the left. Again, a pretty strong prediction there, high probabilities of above normal in the Four Corners region, and that sort of expands out a little bit to the, generally I'll say, to the Rockies. And then a little bit lower probabilities as you move through almost the entire region, north central part of the U.S., of above normal. But still, it's above normal. Okay, I guess that's my point. Above normal temperatures. This is not unusual anymore. This is, I hate to say typical, but becoming more common. In terms of precipitation, though, the area of concern here, I'd say immediately is, or for these 3 months anyway, or is sort of the high plains, sort of with bowing out there into eastern Nebraska and Kansas, but mostly across the high plains and Rockies and all the way down again to the Four Corners area. And that's sort of indicative of a weak monsoon as well. Equal chances of above, below, and near normal across most of the Midwest and Great Lakes in terms of precipitation for those 3 months. And so not a lot to hang your hat on is what we like to say. So this is the drought outlook for, through the end of September, from now to the end of September. Where you see yellow, there is a likelihood of drought expansion. So it's based upon those maps we just looked at, showing dryness across the Rockies, bowing out into Nebraska, but also some of that dryness that we're beginning to see across the central or Midwestern part of the Corn Belt. That could be trouble. I think Dennis can expand on that if there's any questions. Excuse me. But this is a lot of yellow. And I sort of applaud this for the guys who forecasted, because it's hard, man. It is very hard to predict precipitation, and especially in the summertime. And I think it's a good early warning system to mention the fact that all these things are sort of adding up, showing us that dryness may be a key factor. This I hope it's wrong, right? We all hope it's wrong. But
well, and Doug, I think the other thing to add on is that even if we do get some decent amount of precipitation, the heat is going to use up a lot of that. So you can still get precip, and the heat looks even more likely than the lack of precip does.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wildfire season, July and August anyway. The red zone, if you will, is where these folks believe that there's an above more normal probability for wildland fire. Okay, so basically Western Kansas into Colorado, other areas as well, as you can see in the West. And then what, well, I'm not going to say what's going to save us, because that's not true. But one possibility, due to a very high prediction of named storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes in the Atlantic, is that some of our precipitation, especially in the eastern areas of the Midwest, could come from lingering or tropical systems. We hope that some of that may happen and relieves us in some cases. That happened in 2012, if you remember, late in or middle August, I think it was. And that was a very, very, very dry and hot year as well. So just wanted to mention the Atlanta hurricane season outlook. We're looking for an above normal. And the reason for that, by the way, are a couple things. One, moving into La Niña tends to help not destroy the atmosphere such that hurricanes can't develop. so it helps. And the other is the water there is much, much above normal in terms of temperature across the Atlantic, especially in the Gulf. And then moving on, this is sort of a summary. We just mentioned this again. Our El Nino, La Nina conditions are moving toward La Nina, and so conditions are from neutral to La Nina as we go through the summer. In July, outlook for temperature probabilities leaning towards warmer than average, precipitation leaning below average in the Ohio River Basin and Montana, Wyoming, and western areas. And then July through September, generally leaning warmer than average and favor dry in the plains in the west, equal chance of precipitation Midwest and Great Lakes. There's a bunch of places to go if you want to look at stuff or send your friends to look at this presentation, and the PDF file of all these slides will be available in this top areas there. Thanks. Oh, why do we have National Climatic Data Center? We don't call it that anymore. We need to update this. I'm so sorry. It's the National Centers for Environmental Information, who I work for. All right, we got to get on Aaron for that. Climate Prediction Center and lots of other things to go and look at there if you care to. There's Aaron, and there's his contact information. He's responsible for everything. Nah, that's not true. He's responsible for a lot of the graphics here, but Dennis and I also, and Melissa this time, added graphics as well and such. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to move over to the questions. And let's see. Yeah, we have got 10 minutes to do them all, Dennis. So do you want to start at the top? Or should I?
Why don't you start?
Okay.
I'll chime in as needed.
Since May minimum temperatures were so historically high, would that condition be expected to continue into June and July? And the answer to that is, well, not necessarily. There's a lot of things that contribute to a high minimum temperature. Things like cloud cover, high dew points, and general wetness. If an area is kind of wet, it tends to make more humidity, keep the temperatures up, especially at night if there's a lot of wetness around. However, if it's dry, like it was in 2012, dew points and low temperatures actually fall off, kind of like in a desert, if you think of it that way.
I guess, Doug, we should also add to this that is one of the stronger trends that we're seeing in the way of conditions around the Midwest is increasing minimum temperatures. So when you put, this idea of the trend towards warmer overnights, and then you compare that against previous ones, we're going to regularly come out on the high end anyway.
That's true. More moisture in the atmosphere due to climate change. And so curious soil moisture. Oh, anomaly in Iowa. Do you want to say anything about that? Dave had a couple comments about that.
Okay, yeah. And that anomaly that showed up in Iowa is the change. Okay. So if the map that we showed there was the change in soil moisture anomaly. So basically we went from pretty wet a month ago to a drying condition where we've had warmer temperatures and not a lot of precipitation over that last month. So it's not an odd anomaly. It's just that, a good chunk of Iowa was wet, that got us out of drought, and soil moisture conditions were relatively wet. And then we haven't had much on top of that until, maybe some over the last couple days. So that's why that spot is. And yes, with warmer temperatures, some drier air, and some windier conditions, that those all go together to increase that evapotranspiration or the demand from the atmosphere.
And in terms of the calculated soil moisture that we're looking at from the model, is that the whole soil column? Do you remember?
The leaky bucket model, the one I showed, I don't know how deep that was. But the NAS one is a 6-inch estimate. I don't know how deep the other one is. I would assume it is something of a profile, but I don't know how deep they consider profile.
Yeah, now that you said leaky bucket, I believe it is, but I can't tell you. I think it's a theoretical depth. It's definitely not surface. It's more than surface moisture. soil moisture.
Yes, not just surface.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, cotton. Cotton, go.
Again, these next two questions are largely outside of our area and outside of our expertise. I initially said I didn't think there was much cotton down in the area that Alberta had dropped a lot of precipitation. I stand corrected. There are some pretty decent cotton producing areas down there. We won't know the impact of those probably for a week or two when start assessing the overall situation. But the biggest cotton areas in Texas are the West Texas area, which has not been impacted by Alberta. And then the oranges, I really don't have a good answer for you on oranges at all. We can get you in contact with Brad Rippey. I don't think the South Florida flooding, that's as much the orange producing area. It's more Central Florida. We would contact probably Brad Rippey, who's our partner, another partner from USDA, who monitors the whole U.S. in the way of crop production.
Just to add on to the oranges, the only thing oranges I know around here are called Osage oranges, and they have nothing to do with edible oranges that we really like to eat. I'm very, very sorry about Hayes putting an E in there. I know that's sacrilege. I apologize to all of you.
We could bring in Prince and make it the purple haze if we want to, but
Dennis. Yeah, and one comment about deep soil moisture. It's a really good comment that you're watching deep soil moisture in Iowa. We were looking at over 40 inches just, when was it, Dennis? March, April, 40 inches of deficit in areas in Iowa, maybe Missouri, and the surrounding areas, 20 to 40 inches over the last 3 years deficit. So it does take time. Dennis would probably comment on this. It does take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of precipitation over that time to replenish the deep soil.
Correct. And it was unfortunate the amount of precipitation that we had, excessive wetness, but we didn't get as much during the winter or off season as we would have liked to, which could have helped. So we needed large amounts of precipitation, which I'm curious about your assessment of your deep soil moisture profile. I would think, given the amount of precipitation over most of the state, we knocked out finally those deep deficits. Though, we did take note that after that, the rainfall in May, we had high stream flows, but that the stream flows did fall off pretty quickly. So the system was still somewhat dry overall. And Jorge mentions, the soil moisture mentioned, or is standard measurements are 2, 4, 8, 20, and 40 inches. There are places that do go down to 72 inches, which is a 6-foot level. And we usually talk about, from a crop production and good soil profiles, 5 or 6 feet that crops can reach.
Just another note, just on the side here, is Dennis earlier mentioned mentioned the Ohio River Basin projections, long-term projections. That'd be a 3-month projection showing some deficits in terms of the Ohio River. And if you don't know it, the Ohio River contributes about 60 to 65% of the water for the lower Mississippi. In the last 2 years, we've had real issues, big issues, in terms of not enough water coming down into the main stem. Mainly August, September, and October is when it becomes an issue. Right now, things are fine. The north central or northern, the upper Mississippi is contributing massively at the moment. And you could see all that rain that has happened and may still happen will continue that. There may be, but anyway, I'll just say that if things dry out in the Ohio, the upper Mississippi may not be able to be the only thing helping out in that case. So it's something we're watching. It's just an early sort of comment.
Doug, Jeff Boyne just put in the Mississippi River flow at La Crosse is sixth highest for June, going back to 1937.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. Yep, yep. And they had to fill a bunch of lakes and streams up there and soil moisture to get that done. So that's pretty impressive. All right, I think we're done. Thank you for all who hung in there. And if there's any other questions, you can always email or call us or whatever you want. Dennis, do you have any final words?
You mentioned earlier about the rapid drought development. That obviously is a concern as corn starts to get to its tasseling period, which is the time when we can do the most yield reduction if we have stress on a crop at that point. Soybeans, that is pushed off until August overall. So we're not in too bad a shape at this point, but higher temperatures and drier conditions can start to stress a crop a bit as we go along. So we'll have to wait and see how things kind of play out here.
All right. Hey, thank you all for the thanks, and thank you all for just stopping in. We appreciate it. We'll get this saved and online here in the next 24 hours or so, in case you want to use it or share it. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.